Welcome to our newest episode of Culturally Appropriate. We've got a great show for you today. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Carolyn Weber about an upcoming workshop that she has and also the digital release of the movie Surprised by Oxford. Fans of the show might remember that we had director Ryan Whitaker on at the end of September last year about this remarkable movie that I'm sure will be on my top 10 list whenever we release that very soon. And the second part of our show, we're just kind of folding a lot in. The Oscars were announced on Tuesday morning, and friend of the show, J. Curtis Miller, is going to be here to discuss the nominations and the snubs. Within that, we're going to talk about the very few movies released this week for the weekly film rundown, because most of the movies coming out are re-releases of Oscar films. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about Sean Durkin's movie, The Iron Claw, which I feel was unjustly overlooked in the Oscar nominations and should have been a major contender. But I'd like to go ahead and welcome Dr. Carolyn Weber, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff she has planned for the spring and beyond. So Dr. Weber, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jerod. This is a delight.
So, we're very thankful that you're part of our Middle Tennessee community. Can you tell us a little bit about all of the various projects that you're doing and also your academic career?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I'm grateful to be part of Middle Tennessee now too. I love it here. It's a wonderful community. We're really grateful. One of the draws that was here was when one of my books, Surprised by Oxford, was made into a film by Ryan Whitaker. That group was here and Evolve Studios. And so I have been doing pretty busy with that project since we relocated here from Canada about 2 years ago or so. And I'm also teaching at New College, Franklin, which is a wonderful classical Christian liberal arts little school with an emphasis on spiritual formation. I just really believe what they're doing there. So I'm also teaching there as well. And then I love to write on the intersection of faith and literature. So I've been doing projects on that and speaking and teaching along those lines for some time, but in a more concentrated way in this artistic community, which is really just a fabulous place for faith and creativity.
Well, I always like to meet fellow English PhDs. So can you tell us a little bit about your area of interest? Because people think of like English teacher, English professor. They think we've read everything and we know everything and we can teach Beowulf with the same sort of knowledge as Salman Rushdie or anything like that. But I know you have a very interesting academic background in terms of your research. Can you tell us a little bit about those interests?
Oh, well, it's wonderful to talk with another English lit person. It's like we have Klingon, right? We share a little mothership together. But my area of interest in particularly was 18th and 19th century British and European writers. And I did my MPhil and DPhil at Oxford partly on the devotional writers, the metaphysical poets, and also on the romantic writers. So that was my first love in many ways, but I love all reading. And I think once you start teaching and you teach at the university level, as I've had for a long, long time, I'm really old. You teach what's needed and you teach broadly. And I think once, when you love reading, you just love reading all sorts of things, really, so there are areas that have surprised me in where they've taken me, especially as I became a Christian, and that really deep intellectual history behind that faith. But I teach several things in several areas and love it all.
So I think in a lot of ways, there are many misconceptions about academia today from both sides of kind of the culture wars. I was really fortunate at the University of Tennessee to study with Misty Anderson. She's a PhD in restoration literature and does a lot of work on the church, and her husband is a priest. And that was not something that I really thought I would be getting in an English graduate program when I was getting my master's there. So could you talk about you're definitely the person to talk to about this, but some of the misconceptions about what it's like to be an English professor, or what academia is like for English professors in the United States and also in Europe?
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge question. And I think there is also kind of a city of God, city of man divide within that question as well. And all places have fractures and things, but, academia is a slippery place. I think overall, when I've taught at secular universities, it can be very dangerous or detrimental to talk about your faith, or you're warned about that, or to publish, or to receive tenure. And then sometimes at Christian universities, it can be the opposite pressure of being, the pressure to remain within a certain ideological or doctrinal box as well, and not ask questions that rattle any kind of faith, as though God is fragile. So things are sort of tricky on both sides, and I think people can navigate them in different ways. I know some professors that are overt about their faith, and some that are not. And how do we find a way to kind of be in that place and most minister to students? But I think I do find, I think it's driven when you truly love teaching and you love students and you love literature. It can be seen as sometimes living with your head in the sand or living in a world of ideas. But I do, and I used to feel in some ways guilty for having a career in which I did what I loved so much. but I do think that words are incredibly important, and it's a great gift and privilege to be able to have students, much like C.S. Lewis said, be able to better understand their own lives by the reading and studying of others, and that importance of stories. So it sounds like with your background, you really had an amazing situation where you had someone who also was able to talk and teach historically and from a literary point of view for the Restoration period in church, as well as be part of that world. I've had situations where I've been blessed with people who can do that as well, but also situations in which people have been incredibly antagonistic towards the faith too. So I do think, like anywhere else, academia sometimes is its own worst enemy, and that the idea behind it is, I believe, very Aristotelian, to entertain many ideas civilly and in good conversation without necessarily having to accept any of them. But we get into factions in which, we believe that disagreement is hatred, or they're synonymous. And so I think hopefully professors are trying in good faith to create conversations in their classrooms and within individuals.
So I think that's also one of the reasons that Surprised by Oxford spoke to me. So it was such a personal film for me and such a personal story. Is this idea that, very much like you, I went into academia from kind of a secular, burned out on the Baptist megachurch perspective in life. And, what got me back into the church was actually the study of English literature under the tutelage of a professor like this who was involved. And it wasn't like a proselytizing situation. It was like a deep intellectual sort of grappling with these ideas and how to reconcile ideas that I thought were diametrically opposed, which is something that, it's when I explain the story to people, or people like go into the movie, like this is not how I sell it when I'm telling people you have to watch the movie. But, I'm just kind of curious about some of the responses from other people in academia to Surprised by Oxford. And it might be a good idea for us, before we jump into this question, to sort of have you tell us a little bit about what your memoir and what the film is about, and then we can maybe jump into this bigger discussion.
Okay, of course. Yes. So I grew up without a faith. I grew up loosely Catholic, and but by the time I was heading to college, I would have defined myself, Jerod, as probably agnostic, not atheist, because I couldn't disprove God. But I certainly wasn't going to trust in an eternal Father when I couldn't trust in my own. I came from a broken home, divorced parents. My mom had grown more cynical towards the faith with, that she had grown up with as immigrant Catholic immigrants. I think, like so many others in North America, just really busy. Students are incredibly busy. We're working, we're trying to survive. My family was very poor as a result. My father had lost his business, and that with this mental breakdown and the things that he had faced. And I just never asked the questions that mattered. I felt this longing, I think that we all do, that really defines what it means to be human. But it wasn't really until I arrived at Oxford, I had received a Commonwealth scholarship, which allowed me to actually not work. It requires you not to work at first. They have this novel idea that you should actually focus on your studies. And I met Christians from all over the world. I had these stereotypes of Christians, as sort of big-haired TV evangelists that would take your money. And there's not really often a wise portrayal of Jesus in the media by any means, and we can think that people know who Jesus is, but they don't. I was a perfect example of someone who had gone through 20 some odd years of, public school education and hadn't really cracked open a Bible, or had been invited to that kind of conversation. And when I was finally asked, really, who is God to you? To actually really stop and think that through, to think the questions that actually, Jesus poses us. And at the time I was studying myself for world religions, informing my literary work in the MPhil at the time, and weighing these things and intrigued by them. But I ended up reading the Bible from cover to cover, and it was shocked actually at how much sense it made. And that Jesus himself actually really doesn't proselytize that much. He shares stories and meets people where they're at and asks them a lot of questions. And they're the kind of questions that I think are very important for us to sit with. They're the line in the sand kind of questions. And where are you? And in Genesis, and what do you want? And who am I to you? And I had never really sat with those before. So I ended up becoming a Christian after some time at Oxford. And that's I wrote this memoir years later when I was a professor, actually coming up for tenure, but had been warned by mentors not to write about my faith until I had tenure. So I tabled it and wrote it on my sabbatical largely. So there's all sorts of forces at work, I think, with Christians in all sorts of circles. And I'm not at all comparing the pressures that Christians face in jobs with the persecution they face globally. But there are various forms of persecution, or making people quiet, or pushing them to the margins, or not including them simply because they're followers of Christ.
So have you had a lot of response from academics who have responded to the memoir and the movie?
Yes, I have. So I've had, and actually they've been really positive responses. And I think what's delightful is many of the academics I know, I've taught many places and I know, or they're friends of. So I think they approached it with an open-heartedness and a respect for me as well. But also some who've reached out and just said that it really did make them think. It did make them wonder about conversations in their classroom. It really has had a very positive impact. I braced myself actually for a sort of a more negative response, and that hasn't been the case. I think we were aiming to hopefully have a film that would land gently with people, just sort of get them to feel comfortable, or it would be invitational to sit with some of these questions. And I've definitely had people who are many academics and not write to me about the faith in response. I even had a film critic who very openly told me the main reason he watched the film was because he was paid to be in the seat, and he thought for sure this was, once they started talking about faith, he was going to walk out, or this was going to be really terrible. And he really enjoyed it and called himself kind of an atheist and a curmudgeon, and how the film just really spoke to him. So there's been, I think, a very positive reception, even from the academic sphere, that I wasn't sure how that would land.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the strengths of the film, is that it's able to sort of mine that biopic territory, but it has some of those conventions of like a romantic comedy, and then at the same time, it handles these deep theological discussions and these discussions of literature in a way one would not think would be cinematic, but which just all seem to work very well together.
Right.
So, I can't imagine what it would be like to have my life turned into a movie, and also what the relationship with you and Ryan Whitaker, who wrote the movie, would have been whenever, we have these conversations of director saying, by the way, you're no longer going to live in Canada, or I'm changing your last name, or we're going to like speed this up because this is how film works. So was it a weird experience for you, sort of having your life turned into the movie making genre, as opposed to sort of the reality that you dealt with in the memoir?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was very surreal, still is. I never, ever wrote the book thinking it would become a film at all. And I really wrote the book primarily between me and God, and really having one foot in each world. I felt of believing community and unbelieving family and friends that I cared for deeply. So that's really where the book came from for me. And I trusted Ryan. I had been approached about it becoming a film before in different ways. It was very important to me that it kept its integrity and walked that tightrope in a way I hoped of being culturally savvy and representative of what students really see and face and the questions they have, drinking and homosexual roommates and, all these kind of things that happen in real life. But it was also a complicated book to publish because, conservative Christian presses are nervous about this and secular mainstream presses don't want you to mention Jesus. So it was the same thing with film. And when Ryan reached out to me, I just really, and as we developed our relationship, I really appreciated his heart for God and also his heart for his audience of all types, and his artistic vision and his personal integrity. And so I did obviously have to wrangle with some things. He was very respectful and touch base a lot, but you sort of have to give the baby away. But he also walked through or explained oftentimes artistic decisions or, things that you have to do, as you said, for the length of the film or for the number of characters or for making things perhaps more relevant or updated. But overall, I think he and his team very much hit the gentle and inviting approach we were hoping for and praying over.
I mean, my favorite scene in the film and the way that I began the review whenever I did my piece on it was just you're talking about the pen scene in the library. So just to settle a debate, that did not happen, right? It's not like that's something that's
that one was a little bit of poetic license. I was warned. I mean, he does take it. It is true. You cannot use ink in the Duke Humphreys rare books room of the Bodleian Library, nor can you start fires. That's in the 1,000-year-old oath that you have to take. But I had been warned. There's quirky things like that. But I think he also did do a good job collapsing sort of the crisis I did feel of being at that crossroads, much like Lewis felt, the most reluctant convert in England, but also that, someone like Sheldon Van Auken expresses, others have expressed of, gosh, you're coming up against this relentless, beautiful, eternal truth, and it's just really inconvenient.
Right. Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about Surprised by Oxford. And I mean, I guess that is in some ways because of the movie release and because of it just being released digitally and getting an even bigger audience than it had over the past few months. I don't want to overshadow the other works that you've done because you've written plenty of books. I mean, I was trying to find, as we were going through the show prep today, kind of the best resource for everything that you've written, and I just kind of came to the conclusion that I didn't really have enough ability to get these slides together. So I mean, Geneva is scrolling through all of your books.
Oh, that's kind.
So can you talk about some of the other work that you have been doing in addition to this memoir?
Well, thank you. I was primarily an academic until I wrote Surprised by Oxford. So that was another surprise for me as I wrote the memoir, is really something that was tapping on my heart. I had not really done memoir writing ever before and hadn't thought of myself as a faith writer. It was just a very personal work written in blood, really, for me. So prior to that, really, I was just primarily writing academic work, articles and studies. I had done a lot of work on the Romantics, Mary Shelley in particular, the women Romantics, and the notion of longing, that I think is really at the heart of the Romantic period. But after I wrote Surprised by Oxford, I started really being invited to think more about writing more about faith living. And so I did write Holy as the Day, which actually was based on journal entries that I had written. I'm a chronic journaler, but when I was pregnant with our last child, which was a difficult pregnancy and some things we were facing there, and really wanted to look at the idea of being present with God in that He is with us. And then Sex and the City of God was partly a pun that our publisher IVP and I had a good time with, but looking at relationships and hopefully, again, not in a heavy-handed way, but looking at dating, marriage, whatnot, as kind of really this we have the sense of Sex in the City and that concept on HBO and that kind of cultural concept. And also we have something like Augustine's City of God, which is actually really human. And I love Augustine, and I think he's tremendously human, and his confessions greatly shaped me, and his long wrangling with God and kind of this ecclesiastics as well as Solomon's sense of trying everything, and before finding him. And I wanted to just really set those two cities side by side and look at what are really the repercussions of relationship, what we're built for, and what it really means in a way that we can gloss over. Because this is a topic that comes to me all the time with students too. Students very rarely ask academic questions. They usually ask personal and living questions, right, where life is lived, or academic questions just mask those, right? It's what we're all doing when we're writing our stuff, is we're trying to figure other things out. So I've done more of that and some poetry in that too. So currently I'm doing some writing on more intersections between literature and faith, and what we read, why we read, how we read. And I love those reading through our longings, those sort of topics and things to explore. But slow coming a bit, 4 children and a lot of students and courses. So I'm trying to eke that out a bit on the side, but that's a lot where my heart is too in my writing work.
So it sounds like a lot of your work focuses on a period, or at least the writers that we are most well known from this period. Either devout atheists, or very fringe Christians like Blake. So how do you see faith informing, you talking about the great Romantic poets or some of the other writers of this era?
Well, I don't think if a writer has to be Christian to point towards Christ. I actually, in an entire career and life of reading, Jerod, I've never read anything now that hasn't pointed me to the glory of God. And tragedy, comedy, whatever, Christian author, non-Christian author. It's interesting. I mean, C.S. Lewis, who's another group. I love the Inklings, and I love Lewis. I love Sayers, those thinkers that can combine all sorts of genres and theology and academics and how we live. He takes his conversion narrative story, Surprised by Joy, which is what I was pulling on with Surprised by Oxford, from a Wordsworth poem. And William Wordsworth, is one of the most famous Romantic writers. And it's actually a poem about loss and about that moment when we feel joy and then it's taken away from us because we feel the grief of loss. And I think it's a beautiful choice, obviously, because Lewis was trying to convey that how all joy reminds, even in this world of loss and grieving and fracture. All joy points us back to what we're really desiring and our home in God. But Wordsworth was nowhere near as Christian as, Coleridge, for instance, when they worked together on the lyrical ballads. And famously said on his deathbed, "I have no need of a redeemer." But that doesn't mean that his words and his work can't be used by God to redeem things as well, or to point towards him. So I think overall in the Romantics, secular or not, some atheist or not, there's also many that are Christian, and don't get that sort of attention. But I also think that interest that we have in rebellion, revolution, and rethinking things, and many of these things are rooted actually in a great Christian morality that we tend to forget, right? Grows out of that, a world that is very different than, say, Herod's world was, and Jesus changed that.
So that's also something I think that a film like Surprised by Oxford has to grapple with is, I was very careful as I was reviewing the movie, to not let anybody sort of imply that I was saying this is great for a Christian movie, because of the fact that, it is one of my favorite films of the year, bar none. And there does seem to be that stigma that, you've talked about, where whenever a good piece of Christian art, something that has a lot of merit, like your memoir or like Ryan's movie that's based on the memoir, it has to get around that stigma. Do you see that ever changing? Or, what do you think is really behind that? Is it more of the fact that there is this intense bias against Christianity, or does it also have to do with a lot of the genre just not being particularly good aesthetically?
I think all of the above, right? I mean, that's always been the argument with Christian art and, and Sayers or Madeline L'Engle, the argument of just good art being Christian art, making it to the glory of God. Yeah, that it's tricky, it's slippery. And we really, really tried to think carefully about that because, I thought, gosh, if it's on Amazon, could it not have like a paradox genre box, because as soon as you label something drama, someone's going, oh, as soon as you label it, romance, like every box are boxes for a reason. And we get trapped in them, and our God is not, we can't put him in a box. So on one hand, I trust in his sovereignty that he'll bring the film to whoever needs it, and in his timing and in his way, and that's not always judged by the fame or number that we judge things by, but by his purpose. But I do think that I think all things can work. I mean, everything has its place. Sometimes maybe the traditionally cheesy Christian movie might speak to somebody and not to someone else. There's things for everybody. There's taste for everybody. But I think because of a lot of larger culture being judgmental of the Christian faith, and rightfully so, often, right, in many ways too. We can, Christians can be their own worst enemy. How can we make art? I think good art is invitational, and it is, I mean, in many ways, like Oscar Wilde and some, that idea of holding something up to ourselves, so we see ourselves in it. It forces us to examine ourselves, and I think that's why good art endures, is because, and good works endure, what we might term classics or however we want to name them, is they endure because they keep knocking the door with those questions, and we can go back to them and have new questions come up, but we are the better for them because of that. And so I felt that even the cinematography, even the music, it's a very understated film, which is very Ryan. He's tremendously talented and one of the most humble people I know. But when you've spent time with him, you feel like a better person after, and you're inspired to ask those kind of questions of yourself. And I think that that's what an artist transfers to their work or their vision. And that's what everybody Jesus encountered was the intended better version of themselves after.
So we have the release of Surprised by Oxford digitally that's been making the rounds this winter. One of the other reasons that I wanted you to come on the show is a couple of months ago, we did a story on Pliny Bookshop in Cookeville, which does a lot of community outreach with groups like Peachtree, which is a learning center in Cookeville. And I happened to notice just on Pliny's page while we were all snowed in, and I was recovering from COVID, that you were giving a workshop with Peachtree that I think Pliny is co-sponsoring. So I just thought it was kind of a fortuitous connection.
Yeah.
I had Ryan on and then them, and I'm like, well, this seems like the perfect time for you to talk about this workshop that's coming up in February that you're going to be a part of. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that is fortuitous. I'm really delighted to be joining them. Tabitha Merritt there reached out to me and asked me to come visit them, and I'm so excited. I'm getting to know Tennessee better too, so it's lovely that it's sort of in my neighborhood, so to speak. But I'll be coming to do kind of a two-part workshop and session. One on reading and why we read, what is good to read, how should we read. We're in a culture of such distraction and such short concentration, and we're reading all the time, even more so than ever, actually, in many ways, on our tablets, phones, everything else. But are we reading in sustained ways? And is that an important spiritual discipline to still have? Are we reading in ways that we are really engaging with the material or thinking about what we read? And are we what we read? And the other part of the workshop day will be about writing as well. So thinking about writing memoir, about how God speaks to us through our lives, the kind of plotting of our lives and his presence and fingerprint in our lives, paying attention to things. I've always been really drawn to Frederick Buechner's notion of paying attention, to God at work, and to things that we wouldn't normally pay attention to. I think one of the gifts and privileges of the writer is to help us see things anew, um, and to see them afresh. And so we'll be talking about writing as well as a spiritual discipline and as a way of thinking about how to order our worlds and look at God's presence and working within them.
Great. So this workshop is going to be coming up soon. I'll be talking about it on Twitter closer to the time, or X, or whatever we're calling it these days. So I know there's a lot of great events packed into this, and Pliny does a really great job of sort of navigating Middle Tennessee or the Cumberland areas as book culture. So we're excited that you're going to be out in the community doing some of this community relations work and meeting with the broader community. And we're so happy to have you in the Tennessee community and the Nashville community.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I really love it. I think that there's a wonderful, exciting discussion of ideas and things here. And I appreciate the work that the bookstore's doing and that Peachtree is doing as well. I really believe in it. And I think it's very important.
Well, Dr. Weber, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure talking to you. And again, Surprised by Oxford is available on streaming now. And this workshop with Peachtree and Pliny will be taking place in mid-February. So thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Jerod. God bless you.
You too. All right. Our next guest is a friend of the show, J. Curtis Miller. And we're going to walk through the Oscar nominations. So, Jay, welcome to the show.
What's up?
Well, you completely inspired last night when I was looking through social media. Not only a reference in the review that I made this morning, but also sort of the tenor of how this is going to go, because you were how I discovered Hillary Clinton's tweet about Barbie last night.
Oh yeah.
do you want to talk about? I really should have included this in the show prep, but was kind of the highlight of my week in terms of social media. So what motivated you to post this tweet to Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig for being snubbed at the Academy Awards in the respective categories?
I can't remember what I said. I think I was just asking what kind of propaganda is this. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, and it didn't help. I don't know. It didn't help Greta Gerwig's case, in my opinion. She clearly didn't write that. It's just so embarrassing and out of touch.
Hopefully the audience can see it. I'm just going to look at it. But
it reads like an actual meme. Like, it doesn't read like she actually sat there and thought about it and wrote it. I don't know. And it's also funny that, like, to say it can sting to win at the box office and it made 1.5 million, but not take home the gold. Like, what's the gold? The gold is the money that you took home, not like, who really cares about an Oscar statue? It doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Yeah, and it's like, when I read this, I was like, is this about the Oscars or is this about Trump? And is Christopher Nolan going to be Trump? Is that what we're going after here? But,
right.
So yeah, I mean, I honestly was shocked that Greta Gerwig was not nominated for Best Director, and I was shocked that Margot Robbie was not nominated for Best Actor. So, and I like what you also said. Like, in a lot of ways, the Oscars don't matter, and I've written about this in the Pamphleteer before, where when I was growing up, I just got very excited during Oscar season, and I kind of thought about it as a holiday and was really inspired by it. And the older that I got, the more jaded I got by the ceremony until recent years, when I don't think I've actually watched the entire ceremony. I was lucky enough to turn in whenever Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, and nice. I think the last one I watched was during COVID. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about the Oscars in general, and have those changed the more that you've started making films?
I think when you're a teenager, they seem like the highest award possible in the world for making movies, and so I always kind of thought of them as like the end all be all. But I think I stopped watching them live around my first year of college, which is probably 2012, 2011. And at that point, things started to get a little bit more politicized, like just slowly integrated in. And movies that I've never heard of before would win Best Picture. And most of the time I would see them after the Oscars. and they kind of sucked. Like I've never watched The King's Speech after since first watching it, nor have I watched The Artist since watching that. Like, who has talked about The Artist in 15 years? Nobody. It's like I think that was 2010, and I think Inception and The Social Network were up that year. And the fact that The Social Network didn't take home anything except did it take home best
screenplay? That was it,
That
and
was it,
considered the
yeah.
best movie of the decade.
The decade. It's the defining movie of just like social media and the enterprises of all that, and they just give it to they gave that to The King's Speech.
That was The King's Speech year,
The next year was The Artist. 2011 was pretty bad, but at that point I was like, it just didn't mean anything to me anymore. And then, especially within the past like 5 years, I haven't even cared. Like I don't know off the top of my head what has won each consecutive year for the past 5 years. So
yeah, and I mean, I will say in the defense of the Oscars this year, to me anyway, and I've not released my top 10 list because a lot of movies were delayed by the snow, and I was like in the house with COVID for a couple of weeks, but this is the strongest set of Oscar nominees that I can really think of since like 1975.
Yeah.
I've been very impressed with the movies, and there's still a few I haven't seen. I've not had a chance to see Poor Things yet, which is one of the reasons I invited you on the show, because I feel like outside of the zone of interest, which nobody saw due to the snow in Tennessee yet, unless you got a free critic screening, you've seen the ones I haven't, and then I think I've seen a few that you haven't. But you know, I was able to catch American Fiction the night before the snowstorm.
Okay.
I haven't written my review of it yet, but I love this movie. It starts out with one of the best opening scenes that I've seen since The Social Network. This is a movie that is a Best Picture nominee. It's also nominated for Jeffrey Wright's performance in it, Sterling K. Brown's performance, and I think score as well. Have you seen American Fiction yet?
Not yet. I was supposed to see it the night of the storm, and then I kind of got cold feet and decided not to venture all the way out to the Belcourt. And then when I went there, it was sold out. So yeah, I missed it from the snowstorm. I'm gonna try to catch it this weekend or in the next few days. But I've heard nothing. The first trailer that I saw, I think I saw a trailer that's different from this. I didn't even know Sterling K. Brown was in this movie. And the way that the trailer was edited was like I don't know, it was edited like a comedy trailer. So when I was kind of shocked when it came out, and it's got great reviews. So
yeah, and I mean, I think what's great about the movie is it really does sort of like mock Hollywood. It kind of mocks the 12 years of slave mentality, and it has this nice satire. It's based on a novel by Percival Everett, who's one of my favorite contemporary writers. Really great screenplay. I think this is a movie we're going to be talking about for years to come. You know, I'm guessing of the 10 awards contenders, that which is your favorite? I think I know, but
it's definitely Oppenheimer. Then I would say The Holdovers is like a second, not a close second, because Oppenheimer is just my movie of the year. Poor Things is up there, but it's not just Poor Things is just not my cup of tea, and I still haven't seen a handful of these. But yeah, I would have to go with Oppenheimer.
Yeah, and I think Oppenheimer, by all accounts, is the front runner right now. It got nominated for the most awards, I believe, second only to Barbie. Which I mean, I feel like both of these movies should be in the running.
Yeah.
You know, Oppenheimer, I think, is the favorite for a lot of reasons. I mean, the craft is impeccable. I think this is a movie that really did connect with the public. And it's also a movie that what's been inspiring to me about the reception of Oppenheimer is like, you know, we're not getting those like white savior, white people kind of, you know, woke critiques of it that are trying to torpedo it. Like no one is taking that seriously anymore, which I feel like is a big win for our culture. You know, some of that stuff started up over the summer where it was like no women speak in the beginning of Oppenheimer for like 20 minutes, or like where are the Asians, or you know, where are the Japanese in it, and they just sort of got like destroyed on X and all of the social media when they would bring this up.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm happy for the fact that Oppenheimer is sort of a rejoinder to a lot of this stuff that I believe is like it's cheapening the complexity of movies, and it is responsible for a lot of those movies that you think you've mentioned are endlessly forgettable.
Right.
So I'm guessing Oppenheimer is probably going to be the winner. It's the head right now. We also can't leave out Barbie. I mean, I've heard some really stupid conservative hot takes about the Oscars this week about, oh, the movie that should be nominated should be the one that does the best at the box office, because clearly that's the best measure that a conservative commentator can come up with to judge art.
Yeah.
I think it's just ridiculous and dunderheaded. But I mean, the scene in Barbie, I think, is one of the best directed scenes I've seen in a very long time. So I know that you were a fan of Barbie. You weren't on the Ben Shapiro, Peachy Keenan kind of side of that.
No.
But I mean, were you very surprised that these kind of very obvious snubs happened?
To be honest, I didn't notice, because I don't think I didn't really pay close attention. I saw that it was nominated for Best Picture, and then when I looked at Best Directors and didn't see Greta Gerwig, I didn't come to mind. Which, I mean, I think she deserves a nomination. I don't think Margot Robbie really has a case here. Like, I'm looking at the other Best Actresses, and I've only seen 2 of these 5, but I don't think Margot Robbie is any better than Emma Stone for Poor Things.
So since you got the list in front of you, do you want to run down that list of 5?
So it's Annette Bening for Nyad, Lily Gladstone, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I could take Margot Robbie over Lily Gladstone, because all Lily Gladstone does in that movie is sweat in a bed. Sandra Hüller for Anatomy of a Fall. I haven't seen that yet. Carey Mulligan, Maestro. I would probably take. I haven't seen that movie, but I think Carey Mulligan's kind of bland, and I would take Margot Robbie over that. But there's nobody. If Emma Stone doesn't win Best Actress for Poor Things, that's like, people should riot over that. If you're gonna go all out there with every parts of your body displayed on screen in the most graphic way possible and acting like a complete fool for 80% of the movie, and then do a subtle change from like pretty much infancy to like adulthood that's like doled over 2.5 hours, like, I don't know, she deserves the win, in my opinion. Nobody came close.
Yeah, and this is, again, one of the ones I haven't seen. It's kind of a riff on the Frankenstein story from one of our best directors, Yorgos Lanthimos, who made The Favorite and Dogtooth and The Lobster, and has really sort of been building up to this. Greece is lucky to have this guy as one of its major filmmakers. So, this is one of our other contenders that finally is getting a wide release this week. But you also mentioned Anatomy of a Fall, and Sandra Hüller, who's the star of that, and also the movie that I think surprised a lot of people, Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, which, as I mentioned, none of us have had a chance to see yet here in Middle Tennessee. Anatomy of a Fall is interesting because it is a movie directed by Justine Triet, who was nominated for Best Director. And I've seen a lot of jokes online about, I guess we can only have one woman Best Director. I really enjoyed this movie. I don't know that it's going to make my top 10 of the year when I release that, but it's definitely going to be mentioned in the worthy honorable mentions category. But it's a brilliant sort of take on kind of our murder show tabloid culture. It has a lot in common with Todd Haynes's May December, which is definitely going to be on my top 10 list.
Okay.
Which also does deal with kind of like the way that Americans consume tabloid news. But it's also like a nice crime procedural. It's incredibly well executed, incredibly well shot. So that's one that I'm glad is getting a little bit more recognition. But it is interesting that it was almost the sub in this Best Director category. This is the movie that won Cannes this year, the Palme d'Or. And I think it will connect with audiences, even though it is French. May December really got the short shift, and got a Best Original Screenplay nomination. I felt like this was one of the best movies of the year, if not the best movie of the year. I guess I'll figure that out here in about a week or two when I see the rest of these. Have you seen May December? Since it's not nominated, but I really think it should have been.
No, I haven't, and I haven't seen it. He did Carol, right?
Yeah. So
I haven't seen that either. So no, I haven't. I just never got around to them.
Yeah, I mean, and this was a movie that got kind of dumped on Netflix and really could have really enjoyed a theatrical release. I think a lot of the reason that it didn't get the push that it did is it's a less accessible movie And it's a smaller movie than Bradley Cooper's Maestro, which actually had a pretty good showing at the Oscars. And this is the biopic of Leonard Bernstein. This is one that's not being really released in a lot of theaters. I think Regal is showing it in a couple of places, but because it's on Netflix and because a lot of theaters still have that rule that they don't show things on Netflix that are currently streaming, it's one of those. And it seems like I liked A Star Is Born a lot. I liked Bradley Cooper's other work. It seems like it's going to be like a very admirable film. And I really think this is one of those that's going to get shut out a lot this year. The two that we still need to talk about, one of which I also absolutely adore, which is Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. I think he should have definitely gotten a Best Director nomination for this movie. So what were your thoughts on The Holdovers? We haven't really talked about it. I reviewed this one in the Pamphleteer a couple weeks ago.
I think that's probably number 2 for my favorite movie of the year, just under Oppenheimer. I don't know, like, what about it? It's just very charming. It's relaxing. It's a great, just kind of, it just feels like it's very up there with like Scent of a Woman and mixed with like Dead Poet Society, where it's just kind of like over the duration of like a weekend or a week, and like it's just kind of like a coming of age story with like kind of a deranged older like male character that kind of learns more about himself, but also teaches like the younger counterpart about themselves too. It feels like it was made in the 70s, like it's that authentic at times, like the dialogue and just the way it's lit and shot. I don't know. It's gonna be like a holiday favorite from here on out, and I just thought it was really exhilarating and just really well. I don't know. It just hit all the emotional parts where it's like not being sentimental. Like it's kind of a cynical movie, but it's not really, which I like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that really makes it work is that it like the cynicism and the sentimentality are kind of at war with each other the whole time. And like you're getting this biting humor, but then you get these gut punches at the same time. And something else I think that's really inspiring about this film is we have Divine Joy Randolph, who's probably going to win Best Supporting Actress. She's nominated in that category, whereas Paul Giamatti is nominated in the acting category. This is not the kind of like role for an African American that American fiction is making fun of. So like we have two movies with a strong, for lack of a better word, diverse cast, which taps into all of these Oscar quota debates about how now there's a diversity quota to be nominated for Best Picture. But I feel like both of these movies in some ways are kind of critiquing that notion. And it's really inspiring to me to see that there's a movie that's casting these African-American characters. It's giving them inner lives. It's not just using them as an object of pity or as a checkbox or like, something that's like trying to cater to white liberals. So I really appreciate that about The Holdovers too. And I think it's probably one of my favorites. The other one I haven't really talked to you about this movie. I've talked about it on the show, but Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, which there was a lot in that movie that I admired. But I had a lot of problems with the movie as well. Lily Gladstone, as you said in the movie, she just sits in a bed and sweats. I thought her performance was really good, but I've just really been irritated by her on the Oscar campaign trail. So what are your thoughts about Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon? I can never say this title. Killers of the Flower Moon.
There's a really great 2.5-hour movie in there.
Yeah.
I didn't like, I guess I'm like living in like a backwards reality where I didn't feel the length of The Irishman at all, but I felt every minute of this one, and I don't know what it is. It's got all the Scorsese hallmarks in it, but it just like overindulges itself in every aspect of it. And for a 3.5-hour movie that's about kind of like I guess like soft genocide of the Osage tribe, I didn't connect with them at all. Like the more interesting characters were the gangsters themselves. And you could tell like it's very strange considering the ending and considering like Scorsese's comments on wanting to make this movie. Like it seems like he was more interested in the kind of like the the ruthless gangsters aspect of this than the actual Osage themselves. And I don't know if that comes with hiring real life people instead of actors. I don't know, because I could feel some of that at times. Honestly, like I saw it in theaters in October, and I can't really remember most of it. I've only seen it one time.
I mean,
So.
I went and saw this movie, Dolby, Franklin, Thoroughbred 20. I had a great time watching it. You know, I went to the 8:30 show, got out at like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
By the time all the trailers and everything were over. So, I mean, the craft of the movie itself, I think, is very admirable. But there seems to be this tension that he didn't navigate. Like, I felt like Scorsese was holding back a lot on the ideological stuff because he didn't want to be accused. But then you have all these sort of weird, interesting moments that, you know, a lot of the supporting cast is made up of people like Sturgill Simpson or Jason Isbell or Jack White that are sort of these, you know, Middle Tennessee, Nashville, hick lib kind of characters. So there's almost this like white liberal critique in the movie. And I loved the ending, but you know, I just did not feel like a cohesive film to me. You know, when you're making an epic like this, I think every minute of Oppenheimer mattered. That movie felt like it was an hour long to me. I wanted to sit there another hour with it. I wasn't just like overburdened by the length of Killers of the Flower Moon, but I found myself often frustrated with it, which I wrote about in my review for the Pamphleteer whenever we had that discussion back in October. So, you know, the great thing about this time of year, even though there's not a lot of movies being released, is most of these are playing again at AMC and Regal, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of Best Picture marathons at the Belcourt and other theaters as well. So, you know, and I feel like again this year we've been critical of a few of the movies, but there's not one in here that I would say, all right, like that just doesn't deserve to be in here. That's just not a good movie. That's not worth my time. But it is exciting that after COVID and after a lot of the other political and social turmoil that we've been in, that films this good are still being made, and for the most part, people are discovering them. You know, outside of that, we don't really have a lot of movies that are coming out this week. We have something that I do find interesting. Have you heard much about Ava DuVernay's origin?
No, I think I watched a review of that on Film Threat, and it seemed kind of positive, but I have not seen a single frame from this.
I mean, one of the things that I thought was went to go see Ferrari and the Iron Claw, which I wrote about today, and I think should have been nominated in every category. As I was watching the trailers for the Iron Claw, Origin came up, and there's this moment where, you know, that the main actress proclaims, and this is a movie about the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which is a sociology book, or, you know, I mean, it's kind of an academic light book about caste and social class and how that relates to race in America. And there's a moment in this trailer where the main actress proclaims that she doesn't write questions, she writes answers, which it's like, all right, so you write propaganda, like, and this is supposed to be the inspiring music's falling moment.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me about this book or this movie is that, you know, this is a movie that was tailor-made for the Oscars. And not only was it utterly shut out of the Oscars, it got no attention whatsoever, but the studio is dropping it at the end of January, which, you know, if they had any faith in the movie, it would have come out during Christmas and been this big release like The Color Purple, which also failed to garner a lot of nominations. So we're seeing these movies sort of being left by the wayside completely. And we're seeing these movies like American Fiction and The Holdovers, you know, getting some attention. So what do you think that means for sort of our cultural moment? Do you think we're kind of past this 2020 tipping point at this point? People are sort of over that?
I'm not really sure, maybe, because I don't think Ava DuVernay has had much relevance since Selma, and that was 10 years ago now.
And it was a terrible movie. I mean, I want to go on record as saying that, I mean, it's edited like a TV movie. Tarantino said the same thing and got a lot of pushback for it. I don't think it's a successful film in any way, shape, or form.
I've only seen it once, and I can't remember it. At the time, that was 10 years ago, I seemed to enjoy it, maybe, as a matinee. But I haven't seen it since. But it's kind of interesting. This is kind of goes into like the broader landscape of the culture. But I saw a clip of the new Star Wars director who's doing the Rey movie. I don't know how to pronounce her name, and I can't really remember it, but she was in a panel with Ava DuVernay and then some other female filmmakers. And it just seems like I've heard rumors of that movie stalling and potentially not happening because of, I don't know if you are aware, but that kind of had a huge backlash at the beginning of the year.
And it sounds like the Marvels version of Star Wars version of the Marvels, basically, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I think overall, just like those people are starting to lose a little bit of their power, and the genuine ones are kind of being elevated up. I haven't seen American Fiction yet, but it seems like when there's genuine points of criticism as for diversity or lack thereof, like the genuine ones are starting to be elevated, and the ones that were just kind of grifting the entire time or just playing it there by somebody else, like you don't just take this woman I think she just did documentaries in like the Middle East about oppression against women. You don't just take that and have her direct a new Star Wars movie. That's a planned decision. So I think that's starting to happen less, I think.
Yeah, we're kind of entering this world of like where artistry matters again. And we have these artists like Justine Triet or Cord Jefferson or Greta Gerwig. And sort of the imposters and the ideology for the sake of ideology is kind of falling by the wayside. You know, the only other wide release that we've got this week is Miller's Girl, which is a very interesting movie produced by Seth Rogen with Jenna Ortega and Martin Freeman. And it's sort of like a student-teacher romance film, supposed to be kind of like a return to the erotic thriller, which I'm interested to see. I've not heard a lot about it. And then we, of course, still have the Winter Classics and Sunday Summer series at the Belcourt with Babette's Feast, which is an amazing, amazing film I'd recommend everybody check out. Have you seen Babette's Feast?
No, I haven't. I am seeing Dr. Zhivago tomorrow, though. Which I'm
and I know you saw
Runaway.
You saw Runaway Train last week because you were your story was put up by the Belcourt or retweeted, whatever you call it on Instagram. So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean this Winter Classic series has really taken on a lot of effects. We've got Misery this week, and we've got Dr. Zhivago. So there's plenty of stuff to see. I think there's like a bounty of riches at the multiplex this week. Jay, thank you so much for joining us. And
yeah,
I'm sure we'll probably be back in March to do a post-mortem. And I know that MK Ultraviolence is going to be released in February online. So we'll make sure to retweet that and promote that release as well. So have a great weekend.
Awesome. You too.
And that is our show for today. Hope you all get to see some movies this week. I hope you enjoy the better weather, and whatever you do, give it some thought. This is me signing off. Have a great one.